All right, hello and welcome to this month's KeyShot webinar. My name is Rex Roberts and I'm the UX lead here at Luxion, and today I am pumped to share with you the brand new KeyShot 7 configurator. Before we begin, there's a few things worth mentioning. First is that this recording will be, or a recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube page within the next few days. The computer I'm running on today is an older Intel Xeon with 48 virtual cores, but I am going to knock it back a little bit to make sure the GoToWebinar is running smooth. I am using KeyShot 7 Pro, as the configurator is a Pro-only feature. And finally, if you have any questions, please ask them in the questions panel, and Will and Josh will answer them as we go along. If there are any they are unable to answer, then we'll address those at the end of the webinar. So today is all about the configurator. We're going to take a look at exactly what it is, who can use it, and exactly how they could use it. We're going to break it down into the individual elements that make up the configurator. So that's the multi-material, model sets, studios, the configurator wizard, and finally the presentation mode, which is the end goal, the end result of the configurator. Then we're going to go through and take a look at a couple scenes to demo the configurator, how you might set it up, and we're going to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So what is the configurator? As I mentioned, it's a brand new Pro-only feature for KeyShot 7. And it is a tool for presenting model and material variations on a local computer in real time. This is for design reviews and possibly interactive consumer experiences. So here's a screenshot of that presentation mode I mentioned, and is an example of what the configurator end result might look like. So you can see we have some wheel variations here. These are our model variations. And we have some material variations and also some different environments on the side here, and a small toolbar with some various tools, and we'll get into all of these, how to set it up and how to use them. But let's quickly just jump into this example here, this Camaro, and take a look at what that might look like to work with. So I've already set up this configurator in this scene. We can just launch presentation mode from the toolbar, and you can see first where we have to unpause. So we'll unpause KeyShot, go into presentation mode, and this is essentially just full screen mode of KeyShot with some UI to help you change your models. So we can toggle through our models, our different wheels, and then we have material variations that go along with each of those model options. And we can change our environment to see what these materials look like in different lighting situations. So as you can see, it is an interactive method for presenting and communicating your products. And I really do think that this is a paradigm shift in the way you guys can present your products and your designs amongst your team. And right now you're probably rendering out each of these individual material and model variations and having to keep track of several different image files and putting them into a PDF or a PowerPoint and presenting those. But this KeyShot configurator is a brand new way for presenting your model without having to render out all of those variations. You have them all in your KeyShot scene, and you can present that KeyShot scene live to your team in order to make design decisions, educated design decisions. And you can view that product in 360 degrees in real time. You're not stuck with those camera views that you've rendered out, you can actually move around the entire model in 360 degrees. So I do think this is a very powerful tool, and I am excited to see what you guys do with it and who picks it up.
So not only is the configurator a new tool for existing KeyShot users, it also opens up the use of KeyShot to completely new types of users, since there's really no existing knowledge of KeyShot required in order to use it. The configurator setup will be done by your team's current KeyShot user, who understands scene setup and the various features associated with the configurator, which I'll go over in a bit. But the end user, or the one interacting with the final configurator, could be other decision makers involved with the product, such as a company executive, other stakeholders, or even customers. Or in the case of vendors or manufacturers, the configurator could be used to simply verify the intended appearance of a part, color, material, or finish. But use cases like this will become more practical with the free standalone viewer that we have plans for in the near future.
So the configurator is accessed through the wizard, which is a button in your ribbon, as you can see here, and this is going to bring up the configurator wizard, which will lead you step by step through the process of setting up your configuration. And there's three main building blocks to the configurator. So the first one is the multi-material, which we can see here, and this is basically a container for all your different material variations, and this allows you to do non-destructive material changes. And one huge benefit of this multi-material is the ability to share textures and labels in between those materials. So this can be really powerful if you have a label assigned to your material and that label requires a position change. All you have to do is change it for that one label, and it'll update throughout all those different materials. And I'll show you in a little bit exactly how that works. Then here on the right we have the model sets. New in KeyShot 7, you can see that we have added thumbnails to model sets, so now you can see exactly what's contained in those model sets. And basically what you're doing when you're setting up your configurator is you're creating one model set per model variation. So as we can see in this example from the Chevy scene, we have our Camaro, our El Camino, and the three wheels, each as individual model sets. We also have a ground model set here, which we've set to always visible, so that ground will always be displayed regardless of what model option is shown there in your configurator. And then finally, the last element is the studios. So this is another new feature for KeyShot 7, which allows you to combine cameras, environments, model sets, and multi-materials. Now in the case of the configurator, it's most relevant to be using environments, which you can see here, and possibly also including cameras in there as well. And then finally, you can include props as model sets if you have, say, a background or some kind of physical geometry as your environment or your scene. You can swap those out using studios as well. And then again, the final end result is this presentation mode, which I didn't mention is actually touch friendly. So if you do have a touch monitor, touch display, you can run presentation mode in full screen on that touch display and just use your finger with gestures to make selections here in the interface. All right, so let's jump right into the demo. So the first thing I want to show you is probably the most simple example of using the configurator, and that's just changing out some material variations. So in this case, we have this seat and an accent color here, and let's say we just want to create a few different material variations for this suede section of the seat and of the steering wheel. So to do this, we'll use the multi-material feature. Again, this is a Pro-only feature, and it's new for KeyShot 7. And what this allows us to do is to create a container where we can have non-destructive material changes. So in order to turn this into a multi-material, I simply click the button for multi-material. We open up our list here, and we can begin to populate this list. We can drag and drop from the library into the list, or we can create our own material variations from scratch. In this case, I haven't saved this suede material to the library, so I'll quickly go through and just create these variations. So if this is our suede, we'll make this one blue. And then on the left here, you can see we have a few options. We can create a new plastic, just kind of a generic material that we can use as a basis to create a new submaterial. But in this case, since we have this blue suede already set up, we're going to just duplicate that. So we have two options for duplication. One is to just duplicate the material, and the other is to duplicate the material and link the textures. And this is this relates to what I mentioned before about sharing labels and textures between these submaterials. This is how you can go about doing that. But in this case, I do have a texture that is driving the color of our suede. So I'm going to be changing the color of that texture. So I do not want those to be linked. So I'll simply duplicate the material a couple times. We'll have one that will be red, one that will be black, and let's make one white. And then we can go in and start to modify our material here. So we do have this color driven by a cellular procedural texture. If we open up the material graph, we can see what that looks like. So it does look a little complex now, and this is because we display each of the submaterials in the material graph all together, and that's what allows us to share those textures. But in this case, if we kind of break this down, it's not quite as complex as it looks. So if we have this red plastic material active, we can see that the diffuse and the bump channel are driven by this cellular texture, and then we have a color adjust node that goes into each of those so that I can drive this texture by just a single vertex color. So I'm going to make this a red, something like that. And so the way this works is that I have a color adjust, one which creates a darker value than the other. So that allows me to have this kind of base red color with these splotchy cellular darker spots. And then we'll just go through and do the same thing for each of these variations. So when you have the submaterial selected, that is going to put a red outline around it, edit that vertex color, make that black, and finally for white we'll do the same. Okay, so we've just created a multi-material, and we have a few different submaterials within it, and these material variations are what we're going to use to drive our configurator. So this was the manual process of setting up those material variations. And this works well when you have some more customized materials, or when you don't have your materials saved to the library and you want to create them from scratch. So now that we've created our multi-material, we can open up the Configurator wizard. Again, that's accessed from the ribbon here. And the first thing we see is a selection to choose what we want to present. So in this case, we're just going to present material variations. Go next. The next step is to add the parent models. So this is the top level product variation that we'll be presenting. And in this case, we just have one single model. We're not presenting any model variations. So we can just select our default model set and we'll use that as the basis of our configurator. The next step is to set up those material variations, which we've already done manually through the Material tab. So as you can see, it's already populated here. We can toggle through these to see how they look, both in this sub list and also in this top level list here. The next step will be selecting a studio. In this case, we're going to skip this as we just have one lighting environment for this scene. I'll go into detail more about this in a bit. And then in the layout section, we have two options for our layout style. We can use a compact style, which will give you a small toolbar at the bottom, which opens up a bit more screen real estate for you to work with. But in this case, we'll use the touch-friendly mode, which gives you the UI that I showed you back in the Chevy example. So whenever you create a configurator, it's with material variations, it's important that you render those materials. And this is going to give you that material thumbnail that you see inside of that presentation mode. And then for the rest of these items, what I like to do is go into my presentation mode, see how it looks, and then come back and tweak these as necessary. So we have some options for the UI size. So that's the size of the main panel there at the bottom. We can control the material icon size, the model icon size, and the studio icon size. Then we have some options to show and hide some of those individual buttons on the toolbar, and we can also name the individual tabs. So we can really customize the interface of the presentation mode and tailor it to your product and also to your brand. If you want to get really advanced, we can open up the style sheet, and there are some Qt properties here that we can adjust if we want to change the accent color or do something like that. For now, we're just going to stick with the defaults and see how that looks. The last page is just a summary of the different variations that we have, and we can again preview here and go right into presentation mode. So now the first thing I notice is that I do have to scroll a little bit to see the names of those materials, so I think we can increase the UI size. So I'll just exit out of this, go back into the wizard to the layout tab, and maybe increase this to 25%. So now we get the full thumbnails there, and we can tweak this if we really wanted to make the most out of our space here and maybe reduce it a little bit. So the options we have on the toolbar here, the first one is auto hide, and when that icon is blue, it's enabled, and after I believe 7 or 10 seconds, the UI is going to automatically hide itself. And then you can interact with the scene. In order to get the UI back, just hover over the area where that occupies. Or if you're on a touch screen, you can just tap within this area and it'll show. We have some options for camera controls. So if you are on a touch device, this can be pretty helpful. Sometimes the gestures don't work as well as expected. You can just use the camera controls here. If we adjust our camera, we can reset it back to our save state. We can take a screenshot and exit out of the configurator. All right, so that was the first example, kind of the simplest example of a configurator, and that's just the material variations. So let's take a look at another example. So here we have this toaster, and I'm going to be able to share this scene with you guys. So we'll post this in the link, the description in the YouTube, so you can download this and play with it yourselves at home. And so if we just jump into our presentation mode here, we can kind of take a look at what exists in this configurator. So we have some different lighting environments. We have a couple different components, handle and knob. So for each of these we have a chamfered version and a soft version. So if we zoom in here, we can see those two options. If you notice, when I move around, sometimes some of these more complex performance settings will get turned off, and that's a new feature for KeyShot 7 as well, which is the adaptive performance mode, and that just allows you to move around a little faster in your scene. If you do prefer that that option is off, I'll quickly show you where to access that. That would be up in the camera menu and under adaptive performance mode. So we can disable that if you don't want those settings to be turned off when your frames per second drops below a certain value. Okay, so we can check out our different model options here, and we have different material options for our body and also for those accents, which is the handle and the knobs. And as you can see, we do have a model set that's created for each of those variations. And then we have our default model set, which was our starting point. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll make this default model set active. I'm going to delete these model sets so I can show you how to set this up from scratch. Okay, so I'm also going to set up the material variations. So I'm going to turn this multi-material off. If I just click that button again, it's going to take that active material and set that as that material. I'll do the same for our accent here. Okay, so now we have no multi-materials in our scene. We only have our default model set. So this is basically what you'd see when you import your model and set up your materials. We also have some studios already set up here. So I think the best way to organize your scene tree when working in a configurator with various model variations is to separate out each model variation as a sub-assembly or a separate assembly. This makes it a little bit easier to set this up. So let's go into the configurator wizard and go through the steps. So in this case, we're going to be presenting both model and material variations. And the first step is to set up a parent model. So in this case, it's our toaster. But we are going to select that geometry from the scene. And if we expand our tree here, we can see that toaster is the main sub-assembly, and then also that door sub-assembly. That's what makes up our parent model as the toaster. So I'm going to click that add button and say that that's a toaster. We can select that and preview it if we want to verify our selection there. Next, we're going to be adding components. And again, we'll select geometry from the scene. And we're going to add a component for each of those model variations. So the first one we can do is the soft knob. So that's going to be knob soft. And we'll do knob chamfer. We'll do handle soft. And handle chamfer. Okay, so that's it for our model variations. And now what we need to do is to create the relationship between our parent model, which is the toaster, and those components. So to do that, we add a component group for each of those kind of model groups. So we'll add one for a knob and one for handle. And then we'll just, with that group selected, check the components that we want to be added to it. And as you can see, there's an option for none for each of those. It doesn't really make sense in this case. For the handle, if we didn't have a handle, we'd probably burn our hand. But we could add that none as an option. And at any time through this setup process, you can toggle through these options to preview what that looks like. Okay, and then for the material variations, I'm going to go over two different ways of setting this up. So one is the manual way, which I showed you with that car seat example, and we're going to use that for our toaster body because we have some labels here. This is not a material that's straight out of the library. But the second way, we'll be using material straight from the library, and that'll be for our accents here. So let's start with that first. And in order to add a material variation, all we need to do is just click on that material in the real-time view that we want to use as a material variation, and you can see that it gets populated into our list here, and we just drop materials into the list to populate. So we'll open up our library and say search for chrome polished, and then we can drop that in, and what we're doing here is turning this material into a multi-material and adding those sub-material variations. And again, we can toggle through those to see what it looks like. Now, for our toaster body, it's a little more involved since we have those labels. So let's just exit out of this for now. All that is saved in the wizard. And if we double click on our body, we can again turn this into a multi-material, and we can start adding those variations. So for, say, a red variation, we can duplicate the material and link the textures because we're going to be using the same label there. So we'll call this red. Change this color. Looks good. Now for, I wanted to create a white material variation here. But what's different about this is that we have the labels are white, so it's going to be, I'm just going to duplicate this material without linking those textures. This is going to be white. Change this to white. And then we're going to open up the material graph, find that white material, and then in between here, I'm just going to hover over that connector, right click, and add a color invert utility. And that just changed that label from white to black. So now we can actually read that text, and we can toggle through our variations here. And we can go back into the configurator wizard, and with that body material option selected, you can see we have those variations populated into our list here. Okay, the next step will be including studios. So if we open up our studios dialog here, you can see that we have 3 different studios, and these each only have an environment assigned. So we can toggle through those and see what that looks like. We could include a camera, but personally I like to just include environments there. If you do include a camera within your studio, as you're toggling through those thumbnails or options, then you're also going to be resetting the camera. So I think it's nice not to have the camera assigned to that. That way when you're moving around in that full screen presentation mode, you're not resetting the camera every time you're changing your lighting. So we could select all, or go in and select individual studios. And then again in the layout tab, we're going to use that touch-friendly mode. Make sure we render our materials so we have those thumbnails. And then go into presentation mode to see how that looks before we make any adjustments here. So that looks pretty good. We could maybe reduce the height of that UI to eliminate some of this empty space here. Something I do notice is that maybe these thumbnails could be a little better. We can have the model options be centered and a little bit larger in the thumbnail so we can see them better. So in order to do that, we're going to exit out and go to our Scene tab, and we'll expand that model set sidebar. So as you can see, each of those model variations were added as a model set. And we have this gear icon here, which is the settings. So we can choose which thumbnail size to display here in the sidebar. And we also have our thumbnail render settings. So I'm going to open that up, and with this option, I'm just going to make sure the center and fit option is enabled. So that way, when I go here and multi-select these model sets, go back up to that gear and say render thumbnails, it's going to automatically center and fit those objects into the thumbnail, which will make them a little bit easier to see in presentation mode. Another thing you can do for the thumbnails is actually use a custom camera. So that's what I've done here in this Chevy example. So for the wheels, I had a camera called Wheel Close-Up, and I can double click just to make that one active. And if I have center and fit unchecked, it's just going to use that camera angle that I have in the scene there. So I can then multi-select those and say render thumbnails, and so you can see that updated now. It has the ground plane in there. It's a slightly different material. So yeah, you have a few options for creating those thumbnails depending on what you want displayed in your presentation mode. So now you can see, yeah, they're a little bit larger, a little easier to see there. Just let me unpause that and go back in here. So yeah, as I mentioned, this KeyShot Configurator is a design decision-making tool. So how that comes into play currently is that we can, view these different options and make decisions on what materials we want to use for the final product, what our final decisions are, or maybe what materials we want to eliminate. So what we can do to save some of these is to just take a screenshot. So if we decide that we like the chamfered handle and the chamfered knobs with the chrome material and say a white body, then we can go ahead and save a screenshot. and we can save that out and call that, final variation 1. Something I do like to do is to go into preferences, and there's an option under screenshot, which is ask where to save each screenshot. And when that's enabled, when you click that screenshot button in presentation mode, it'll allow you to give it a name, so you can actually add some logic and give a name to that screenshot. All right, so that's generally the process of setting up the configurator in KeyShot 7. I went over a simple example of just changing material variations, and in this example we've seen some different component variations as well. How are we looking on questions over there, Josh?
Looking good. We do have some a lot of interest in how we can use the configurator either with a VR headset, or if it's going to be able to be used with KeyShot XR in the browser in the future. Maybe you can talk to that a little bit, and I've also commented that we are looking for feedback as far as that goes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a lot of ideas for what we can do and where we can take this configurator. This is really just the first step, and what we want to see is, what do you guys want to use this for, and what kind of features will benefit you the most. I personally think that this whole idea of it as a decision-making tool is very important. And I think we can build upon just being able to save out screenshots and make that a little more robust to possibly have some kind of voting system. Maybe it's just a matter of being able to right-click on one of these material options and say discard or eliminate or elect, and basically choose which are the favorite options. So we would love to hear your guys' feedback on what kind of tools you would like to see in this feature, and how that could benefit you and your team in order to make this a valuable tool for your design reviews and your internal presentations. Now, we do have an example of the configurator currently running for Axalta at their brand new Consumer Experience Center, and it's actually set up as a demo station. So let's jump into the other example we have here. Let me go back to my configurator camera. There we go. So in the Axalta Consumer Experience Center, they have a scene similar to this, not this exact scene, but it is available for the attendees of that center to come up and actually use the configurator and to spin around the model and to choose their different paint options and material options. So this is definitely something we see as a possibility for kind of a point of sale display or some kind of enhanced customer experience, maybe at an automotive dealer or in store, so the consumer can really explore the product and look at the different options without having to have the physical thing right there in front of them. And that the idea of this demo station can relate back to our toolbar here. So this button is for exit presentation mode. In that case where we have this set up as a demo station, we don't want the viewer to accidentally exit out of this and then be presented with the computer's operating system. So in that case, what we do is go into our wizard, into the layout option, and then uncheck this option to show the exit button. So that way when we go back in there, we don't have that exit button and they can't accidentally escape out of it. In order to get out of it, just press the escape key on the keyboard.
Well, that's great, and it looks like a lot of people are wanting to be able to export or send these configuration files out to people, so I think that's something we've discussed, and we're definitely going to be looking at that. So thanks for your feedback, and keep sending it in, definitely. There was some interesting questions here on using lighting, being able to set up different lighting scenarios, or even adding pricing to the configurations. What kind of things are possible with that, Rex?
Yeah, I'm not sure as far as pricing goes. I think this would have to be something tied in on the back end. But yeah, certainly output is the next step. And we are currently working on the ability to render out all combinations. So that number can grow exponentially very quickly, especially an example like this where we have maybe 30 different paints for 4 different pieces of the model. But so the first step is being able to just render out all those combinations. And then the next step is going to be this viewer that Josh mentioned, which is something I'm really excited about. And what we've talked about is having the ability to save out this configuration file and allow for anybody to open it up. So this would be a free viewer that does not require a license of KeyShot to run. And it would just open directly into this presentation mode. We would probably have something like screenshot disabled, so you can't render that out just on any machine, but you would be able to open it up, possibly install a small executable, and have your scene here for you to share with a stakeholder or a manufacturer. And what that would allow you to do, or allow the manufacturer to do, is to then verify exactly what that model option looks like, what those material options look like, and yeah, kind of eliminate some room for error in the process going from design to manufacturing.
Okay, I think, could you explain a little bit about how, how this runs? It's just in KeyShot right now. I think there might be a little
Yeah, sure. So
questions on that.
So as you can see, we're in KeyShot right now, KeyShot 7, and essentially what presentation mode is just a full screen mode of KeyShot. So in KeyShot 6 we did have a full screen mode, and it would actually be the same hotkey, so that would be Shift F to go into full screen mode. And in KeyShot 6 obviously you didn't have this UI here. So we've added in 7 with the configurator is just this UI overlay on top of that full screen session of KeyShot. So this is real time. It is just a full screen version of what you're seeing in KeyShot. And then why don't I just show you what the compact mode looks like. So that was the touch-friendly mode with all the thumbnails. Then we can switch over to the compact layout style, and we can take a look at what that looks like. So we just have a small toolbar here. Yeah, a little less obtrusive, gives you a little more space to play with, but you still have the ability to change your car. So maybe we want to show the Camaro, and we have these material options for each of those model options. We can choose our wheels, and again we have the material options for those wheels. And then we also have the option to change the studio here, which in this case is just the environment. And why don't I just quickly show how to add a studio while we're here. So if we go over to the Environment tab, we have 3 environments populated here. And we can grab another environment. Maybe I want this port, and just drop it into the list there. And then what we'll do is add a new studio. I'm just going to ignore the camera because I'm not going to include the camera. And I'll call this port. So you can see in this port studio, we just have the environment enabled and assigned to that studio. If we go back to our configurator wizard to the studios tab, then we can go ahead and select the port, make sure that's included. And then when we go into the touch-friendly mode and go back into presentation mode, now you can see we have that 4th studio populated in our environment list here. All right, anything else?
Hey Rex, one thing that I might add, based on some of the questions that we've been getting, people asking about other places this could be interacted with, whether it was on the web or a mobile device or something. I think one thing that's worth mentioning again is that the mode that Rex is in right now, the machine he's on needs to be rendering what we're looking at the whole time. So if you're on a device or some sort of platform that is incapable of doing, ray traced rendering, that's going to be a limitation there. But again, there are lots of things we're looking at in order to bring this to other than KeyShot users, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point. And I am on a fairly powerful machine here today, so if we go up here, you can see we're at 88%. So I am using 42 cores. Depending on the context of the configurator and what your model is and how difficult the scene is, it's going to affect how smooth the viewing experience is. So obviously, the more powerful your machine, the faster you're rendering in KeyShot, and that's going to be the same with the configurator. The smoother the configurator and that presentation mode experience will be with a more powerful machine. So if you are using this in your organization to do real-time design reviews, then you're going to want that to be a powerful machine so that it'll render quickly as you're presenting it and as you're moving around. There are some things you can do to speed up the rendering. So that adaptive performance mode was one of them. With that enabled, as you're moving your camera around and your frames per second, so this value here, a little hard to see, but when that value drops below 20, then that adaptive performance mode is going to kick in. I can't get it to kick in. So that'll just make the interaction a little smoother. I suppose depending on your scene, You can also disable something like maybe self shadows. In the case of a car, maybe not as important, and with that disabled, it is going to render a lot faster. So kind of depends on your scene, but I would say, yeah, you probably want to keep the settings a little bit lower, and then again have a powerful machine in order to make that presentation mode viewing experience as smooth and fast as possible. So yeah, this presentation mode is in real time, just like how you interact with KeyShot. So, you know, the same kind of behavior. And again, we're looking into things that we can do later on down the line to improve this experience and to also open it up to more users and more platforms. I saw there's a question if the configurator file will be available to download, and I do have the toaster as a shareable file. So this was modeled by, I believe, Richard in-house, and so that means we can share this model and we can share this file so you guys can take a look at it at home or in the office and see how it's built up and play around with it yourself. Cool. Any last things that you guys would like to mention?
Not from this end. I think that was well presented. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Rex. And if you haven't tried KeyShot 7 yet, just hop over to keyshot.com/try and download it, and you can play around with this configurator and see what it's like, see what you can do with it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us here today. Like I mentioned, a recording of this will be available on our YouTube page. Also check out our YouTube for more quick tips and tutorials and KeyShot 7 content for you to feast on. All right, thanks. Bye.